thank you everyone for joining us. We are so excited to present this webinar on demystifying AI in senior care. Whatever your role is, we hope that today's webinar will be educational, informational in nature. This is strictly to educate folks on what we've learned in the AI industry as everything's constantly evolving and shifting underneath our feet when it comes to the era of AI. We're thrilled to have Nicole joining us today. Nicole Kaufman is the Chief Transformation Officer at Genesis HealthCare. Nicole, would you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your role and what you're doing with AI at Genesis.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole Kaufman. I am the Chief Transformation Officer at Genesis HealthCare, which means I have the pleasure of participating in webinars such as this, where we're bringing in innovation to the healthcare and senior living, senior housing space. My background is seniors housing. I started about 20 plus years ago in the independent living, assisted living, skilled world with Marriott Senior Living, which is now Sunrise. I've done everything from sales and marketing, clinical programming, strategic and development on the operations side, as well as new acquisition and divestiture. I'm excited to be a part of the panel today because generative AI is the future in so many ways. And I'm excited to talk about how Genesis is implementing Skypoint specifically into our foundation.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicole. Greg, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. Gregory Petrosian, Director of Sales at Skypoint. Although I wear the sales hat, I have a long history in the healthcare space, have worked with a wide spectrum of healthcare organizations. I'm really excited to dive into how we've been enabling generative AI for customers like Genesis and beyond. It's been really exciting to roll up my sleeves and get into the type of use cases that are actually going to drive business value, not only for the organizations, but for the industry as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And last but certainly not least, Gavin is a Director of Data and AI Services. Would you mind introducing yourself, Gavin?
You just did a little bit. But hey, everyone, thanks for joining us. So as Drew said, I'm the Director of Data and AI Services here at Skypoint. I help lead everything from our product team to implementation and customer success, as well as our professional services team. I work with our customers to really help identify relevant use cases that we can actually drive to reality. Coming from a strategy background, I think there's plenty of cool and fun stuff that we can do in the world of AI and analytics. But I also bring that perspective of if it's not driving individual or group decision-making or behavior change, then we're not actually going to get to a value point, right? And so I'm always really bringing that perspective with our customers, and I'm really excited to kind of share the experiences I've had here.
Thank you, Gavin. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Let's talk about our agenda, the topics that we'll be covering today. We're going to really set the playing field and talk about some terminology, really getting a base level understanding of what is AI, what is generative AI, the AI's evolution over time, where it started and where it is today. What's an AI Copilot? There's a lot of discussion. You may have heard about this Copilot thing. What is it? What does it do? What makes your data AI ready? You can't just plug and play your data into AI and expect it to work. We'll talk about that. Common myths and misconceptions about AI, as well as the elephant in the room, the privacy, the security risk in highly regulated industries. That is always a topic of discussion. And then we'll talk about 3 use cases for AI. And then we'll round out with how to build your AI strategy. What does it take? What's involved? We'll have a lot of insight and experience from Nicole's perspective on what it takes to do that. And with that, let's talk a little bit about who we are at Skypoint. So Greg, would you tell us a little bit about Skypoint and what we do?
Yes, I'm so excited to be introducing Skypoint, us as an organization, being so focused on AI. We, in our history, have been very data and analytics focused, and now being early adopters of generative AI, being in the room early on and being able to embrace this technology where we are bringing it to industries. We are bringing industry specificity to these large language models and large language model use cases. We've been doing a lot of work in a broad spectrum of analytics and generative AI is now our focus. And we basically have packaged our platform to bring all this infrastructure, to bring all the components you need to be successful with data directly into our customers' infrastructure. We are using very modern technologies to do this, to be able to help customers get to that point and to be competitive with their data and their insights. We are headquartered here in Portland. It is nice, gray, and rainy, just how we like it here in Portland. We were founded in 2020 by our CEO, Tyson Matthew. As you see on the bottom, from the left, we are a longtime Microsoft partner. We deploy our solution directly through the Microsoft marketplace. We have all the esteemed security and privacy compliance badges, from High Trust to SOC 2, very HIPAA secure. We were very early on as well in the privacy compliance space. When you think of GDPR and CCPA, anything we do around data must have those security controls. And we're going to be diving into more of that. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I really love our tagline, chat with your data. And it should be easy as that. In the self-service analytics world, when it was all about, adoption around data literacy and how to use these tools, it's amazing to be able to just use the English language naturally, to be able to get insights, automation of tasks, and be able to hopefully get to the point of a 4-day work week one day in this world, where our AI overlords are giving us our time back.
All right. And what would a webinar be without some interactive polls? So we're going to pull up a poll right now for you all to weigh in on what's your organization's current status with AI. So I'm going to go ahead and relaunch this poll. You should be seeing something pop up on your screen right now. Are you currently blocked, or is AI prohibited at your org? Are you exploring it? Are you curious, interested? Are you implementing? Is it in production? You're one of the lucky ones, or not interested? Hopefully that's not one of the answers, but you never know. We want to enable that as well. So we'll go ahead and let this run, give everybody a chance to vote. And then we also have a question for Nicole on this as well.
Well, before I tee up Nicole, I was just at a conference having a panel on this discussion around generative AI. And for me, it seemed very much like, and I will be surprised if I don't see this, where people are very much in either the currently blocked or exploring zone. So I hope my thesis is wrong. We've got others on this call that are maybe later on in the stages. So, but getting to you, Nicole, what was the top blocker for adopting AI, and how did Genesys overcome those hurdles?
Absolutely. Well, I will say that I love your tagline too, chat with your data, because it just shows the ease by which we should think about adopting models such as yours into work applications. And I really think that that was the initial blocker early on, is that it's new. People don't understand, not just in the healthcare industry, but across many industries, what generative AI is and how it can be applicable to all different types of professionals, departments, and application or data analytics interest. I also believe that we as an industry, specifically at Genesys, have built some pretty solid IT infrastructure. We know how to get data that we are looking for. We have to report out in a lot of different ways. And so there is some predictability and some reliability with the way organizations get their data today. But I'm sure if any of us try to ask for something new, it takes people off of projects and focus groups and a lot of time, energy, and effort to shift gears and be agile with the data as you find new things that you want to go after. That was an opportunity at Genesys. We've done a lot. We're a large organization with some solid people and process. And so to think differently about how we might get access to data and even think about new data sets that can take our strategies and implementations of care delivery to the next level, it took a little bit of time for people to buy into that. And once we did, the world is your oyster, right? But really, it's just unknown. And then secondly, I would say trust. We all have the grandparent and my parents who still don't put their credit card information into a regular buying system, right? And so just understanding what the trust in the software that you should have takes use, and it takes success and repetition. So until you dive into that, you're at a disadvantage. And at Genesis, we've been able to hit that right away so that we build trust in the information that we get.
Right, and we should see some of the results here of the poll. Let me know if you're seeing this, but 40% are exploring right now. So are those results showing up for you? Okay.
I see it. And, I'm actually surprised. I love to see so many people in the ready to take action piece versus just the, hey, still learning about it. That shows, I think, the excitement that people have, and also the idea that we can actually get value from this technology.
You know what else, Greg? I'm surprised that there's none who are currently blocked in healthcare. Sometimes organizations are risk averse and, lots of legalese. And so for us to really be open to exploring it with folks on this line, that's awesome.
I think that tells us we've got the innovators on the call right now. So maybe we don't have to hold back. We should just get deep. We should get pretty deep on this.
I think so.
Discussion.
Cool. All right. Well, if anyone else has questions along the way as we go through this, please use the chat feature in the bottom, and I'll be mining that as we move along. I'll go ahead and end these results. And Greg, let's go ahead and talk about some definitions and terminology.
Awesome. So let's define AI. What is it before we talk about what isn't it? Okay. So one of the enabling pieces of being able to use AI is having to unify your data. AI isn't just going to pluck out of thin air that it knows your organization or it knows you. I think one of the things I've been seeing is people are scared, or we're seeing the sensationalized news headlines, out in our daily lives where it's going to take over the world and this thing is sentient. The more you work with it, the more you realize it's really not, right? And it's only as good as the data it has. And we hear this all the time in the data space, garbage in, garbage out, right? But you got to have your data in a singular place, and you have to have it structured, molded, and it needs to be clean enough in a place where you can take advantage of it, right? And I think what I've seen from my years of being a data professional is a lot of organizations haven't even made this initial investment of having their data in a single place. They're still relying on their one-off vendors, or a lot of the times just on their ERP system. And, it's almost like they're beholden to these data systems and don't realize that once they start owning their data by storing it and doing something of value with it, whether it's generative AI reporting, whatever, that is truly the first step. So next, I just want to talk about, okay, what is generative AI? So let's say you've brought your data together and now you're feeding that data to generative AI. Now, an example of this, if you've worked with ChatGPT, there's a little plus sign when you're going to do your prompt. You can, ingest a photo or a PDF or different types of material that now the generative AI agent can read and use its knowledge of what it's known. When we think of ChatGPT, what has it been taught on? The internet knowledge, right? And a cleansed version of that internet knowledge. So now it's able to synthesize what it knows against the data or the context that you're giving it. Okay. And so there's terms out there we're hearing. It's a chat bot. I think that was one of the early on days of what we had. You think of, I'm in a support queue something went wrong with my order in Amazon. I was just going through this yesterday. I wasn't able to actually talk to the agent. I was sitting there hitting buttons, and I was so frustrated because I didn't have the button I wanted, right? And so it had a very deterministic, knowledge base where it's just like, hey, based on X, do Y, or do Z. Don't give Greg his money back that he deserves. And so, but this idea of a chat bot, then there is this idea of a plugin. In ChatGPT, this plugin architecture I think is very elegant. And there's a standard architecture, whether you're trying to do a plugin in ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or even heck, Amazon. I'm seeing a lot of standardization happening today in the industry that I never thought with my wildest dreams would happen. And it's opening the doors to innovation like what we're talking about. But anyway, think of a plugin as a means of bringing that data to that chat agent or to the forefront. Now, there's also this term Copilot. I love the term Copilot because what is generative AI? It's not a replacement for me or my job. It is a co-pilot to what I am doing. And this idea of being an agent, more than a chatbot, more than this just deterministic X to Y, it's more of actually conversational. It's actually solving my problem. And it's able to do the acrobatics around some of the edge cases that I may have not pre-programmed into it. And what does GPT stand for? You'll probably never hear somebody actually say its full name, but Generative Pre-trained Transformer. Thank you, Sam Altman, for that word. But hopefully a more high-level discussion of what all these different pieces of generative AI are resonate with what you guys have been seeing as you work with it. Now, there's a component that we bring in addition to this GPT landscape, which is having industry specificity, having an industry large language model that almost think of it like a guardrail next to that industry, next to the knowledge of the internet. Well, the knowledge of the internet, and for all the acronyms we have in healthcare, there's also tons of acronyms in retail, tons of acronyms in hospitality and other industries. How does it know what I'm talking about in healthcare and what I'm being specific about without that type of industry specificity? And what we've done, we've spent a lot of time training, fine-tuning, and this is truly the IP we bring with Skypoint, is senior living value-based care. And that when you're working with your agent, your co-pilot, it knows you're in the senior care, value-based care world. And it's bringing all that knowledge of the industry to you at your fingertips based on your data, on your context, and who you are. Now, you've heard me use this term, context. What the heck do you mean, Greg? Now, the technical piece of this, of context, is, there's the retrieval augmented generation, where it's like, hey, rather than just on your general knowledge, I'm going to give you, you're going to augment that with an additional piece of data or document or whatever. Now, there's also, how do you do that fine tuning? It's that reinforcement learning. And that all happens, guess what, from humans. It's not happening from the machines, right? It needs that reinforcement learning from us, like what you did wrong, or hey, like this doesn't really get me my answer, or hey, maybe I just need to articulate more in my prompt. One thing I really love about the generative AI movement is it's going to make people articulate more. How many times have you been in the room where somebody says, just expects you to read their mind as to what they want, right? I think the more we're using generative AI and getting those in the business units that are going to be using these tools to articulate and be able to say, hey, what was good and what was bad, is going to be the best for everybody. Now, it's this idea of tagging and metadata. Now, if the term metadata is over your head, think if you had an Excel workbook. In your Excel workbook, you've got rows and columns. In your columns, you've got titles of what is this title, or of what is this column. You've got your first name, your last name, maybe your phone number. The metadata is like, think of it like the sub bullet to that column. First name. Oh, what is this? This is the first name that you were legally given. Or, hey, this is your phone number. This is probably your main, it's typically your cell phone number. That metadata is describing what that data is, as well as that tagging provides just one more layer of context for the AI to be able to understand what's going on. And then we've also got embeddings, and that's where you are able to embed different componentry, and it's not just one large amorphous blob. Think of that this agent, what it's doing is it's orchestrating many different things in the back end and many different agents. And so it's actually a pretty complex architecture, what's beneath the scenes when you're prompting with generative AI. Gavin, Nicole, anything that you guys want to expand on? I kind of just got off. I need to get off my soapbox for a second.
The only thing I would add is like, going back to the unified data piece, I don't think people should hear that as a, hey, we have to have this very, very mature data structure to even get started with generative AI, right? Like it's something where you can identify a use case and then unify the data that supports that use case and just do it in a very iterative path. It doesn't have to be a waterfall of everything has to be done before we can move on to step 2 type of thing. It can be just kind of go in with a scalpel and get the data for that specific use case.
And I think that's exactly why a lot of organizations have failed with this, right? They've taken a very waterfall, I have to do everything all at once approach. And I think in our past, we've been very successful in being able to deliver warehousing and analytics solutions because we've been very pragmatic and solve for a small end-to-end use case. Don't try and boil the whole ocean and then grow from there.
The only thing I'd say is the expertise that Skypoint brings with being industry specific, I think is important in terms of what some folks may know about generative AI and the news, and the fact that we get a lot from, reports from the media on how people might use ChatGPT and ask it a question and it makes something up. That's not our experience. Skypoint has been able to provide not just a foundation of accuracy, meaning if I don't have the data available, I'm not going to provide you with an assumed response, but also it ensures that the data is relevant and the way that it starts to think actually supercharges a team. And the only thing I'd say, as an example on the healthcare spectrum, managed care providers, the Navi Healths of the world, they've been using generative AI for a long time in order to dictate the way care is delivered in skilled nursing facilities based on years of inputs that they can spit out length of stay, rates, the care plan expectation. And I think it's time for us to take some ownership in our data, to be able to have the types of conversations that say, actually, in our market and with our patient type and with our care delivery model, here is what we know about the length of stay or expectations of care. So the industry specificity of Skypoint, I think, is a definite feather in the cap there.
Overall, how did we get here, and what are the different milestones we've hit to be able to get here? So rule-based systems, like I was talking about that chatbot, like X leads to Y. That was in the 80s to 2000s. Then we were able to have these keyword recognition, like if you see this one keyword in my question, then do X, Y, or Z. I don't need to have like the full exact sentence, or I don't need buttons to get me to, that next rule. I can actually have these chatbots kind of recognize little bits and pieces of what I'm asking it to do. Then now we've lived in the world of Siri and Alexa, and we've probably all been frustrated with it. But they've at least gone way further than where we've been in the early 2000s. But being able to use machine learning and natural language processing, I remember being, building reporting even with some very early stages of natural language processing. It felt early, and I know it still feels early when I'm using my iPhone with Siri. But it's starting to be able to do very simple tasks and automation tasks, like, hey, turn my lights on, or hey, as I leave the house and, based on a geofence, do something for me. And so I think it started getting people warmed up to this idea of, hey, I have a personal assistant, but man, do I have to really work hard to make that personal assistant valuable in my life? Now, later in the 2000s, closer to where we are now, this context awareness, this ability of the personal assistant, knowing who I am, having details on my account, I am able to, modify pieces of it, of how I want the personal assistant to work with me. There was a lot of big data and deep learning were components as how we got here. But again, it was still kind of clunky and still very hard to drive a lot of value in our day-to-day lives. Okay. Then came generative AI, but really for the coders. It was, if we can get generative AI to help a developer, if we can feed generative AI with being able to turn a junior level developer to be able to do and solve problems without having to call in the senior developer or at least get them off the starting blocks. This is where we really started seeing value take hold in generative AI, and we still continue to see it. And that was in the 2020s. Okay, so this has been around a while. For those that think that generative AI is a new hot topic, it's really not. I think it's the commercialization of it and the sense it getting sensationalized in the news. That's why we're in the state of where we're at. But this technology has been around. And for the developers out there that started embracing GitHub Copilot, I think they really saw a lot of the promise, and they were the ones that got excited about it. Now, we're in the era of AI, these advanced AI models that can write poetry, that can understand what you want, that can build different permutations, that can also infer based on data. And this is what the whole thing with, OpenAI, where it can solve a problem it may or may not have seen before, right? It's a combination of the natural language processing, deep learning, and these techniques that we've built upon, and then it had that clean internet knowledge that it was able to really dig deep into. I mean, it was, again, exactly what I'm telling organizations. It's only going to be as good as the data that you have and the amount of effort you've put into governance, the metadata, the tagging, the cleaning. That's how you really get value from it. And that's really what OpenAI did. They spent all that time eating their veggies so then they can have their dessert. Now we're all eating dessert with ChatGPT. And hopefully we don't get to the point of this, Terminator, the autonomous AI agents that are ruling our world. And, I think I've seen, a bunch of memes where it's like, okay, the human race built AI, destroyed humans, and then we go right back. This is the whole cycle of humanity. Now, till you start working with it, as I said, this isn't a sentient beast. But, as long as we can debunk that myth and move on to the point of, hey, let's use this thing, I think we're going to get there pretty fast. Okay, so that's the history. So what is a Copilot? Let's break down the components, and I'm going to start speeding it up a little bit more. So there's generic Copilots, and this is what we're using, right? The commercialized versions of these agents. Microsoft's got their Copilot. OpenAI has ChatGPT. There's going to be many more generic Copilots out there that are going to be specific for different things. And that specificity really comes from the next few layers, okay? So your data, got to bring that data in. That's where the augmented generation really comes, is based on unified source, or even if I'm just feeding it a singular document or piece of data. I'm giving it a little bit more context than when it had just helping me write some poetry based on what it already knew, okay? Next, the context. And this is what we're working on, and I'm sure many other organizations start bringing this context in for whatever they want that Copilot to be really good at. It's giving that guardrail of, hey, like, rather than the whole knowledge of the whole earth at all the time, let's really focus and let's dive in deeper around this specific industry or need. It's almost like if you've got an analyst that knows a little bit about everything, and then you've got somebody who knows a lot about a very narrow subject. So like bringing that narrow subject into view. And then that feedback. This is how it all gets better, right? I believe we're in the dial-up stage right now of Copilots. And when you have your business-specific Copilot, when you hire your Copilot, it's going to be kind of like a junior analyst. It doesn't really know a lot. It's going to feel like it's clunky, and it's going to need that human feedback to get better and better. But hey, it's going to have that memory. It's going to be able to grow with you and grow with your organization. And I think that's where, that's where we're going to see a lot of that value from generative AI, is when it's had that time to be in the four walls of the organization, to have that longitudinal history and thought, to have gone through its failures, just like we go through our failures. When we fall off the horse, we get right back on top. But we believe that these models will be able to jump back on the horse a lot quicker than we are.
I was just saying, you referenced earlier Copilot and planes, right? And I'm sure when it was introduced to the industry way back when, people didn't know what to think of it. Yet now, every time we're on a plane, Copilot is activated, and it's not replacing the expertise. It just up levels that person's ability to do their job. And so what we like most about the Copilot at Genesis is that it creates the control that we need, and it ensures, that we are able to take our work to the next level in a faster way than if we didn't have a Copilot.
Yeah, and that really makes me think of the black box AI that we're typically thinking of what AI is, right? Like, think of the example of like our credit scores, right? AI that was just kind of released and making decisions that were impacting people's lives, and nobody really knew why it was making the decisions, but it was still in our daily lives, right? You're not going to have AI fly the plane. You're going to have the person using that AI to be more efficient. At the conference I was at, they were talking about, well, if you have AI, approving claims, and if it's only 99% accurate, that 1% compounds over the years, and you need somebody to actually be there providing oversight as a human, making sure it's doing the right thing, making sure it doesn't have the biases, right? And so I think we've all learned from our mistakes of traditional AI. One of my favorite books, Weapons of Math Destruction. If you haven't read it, please do. I think that'll give you some really good foundational knowledge of how AI has been used for better or for worse, and how we're learning from that, especially now in the generative AI context. Okay, so now that we know roughly what copilots are, now let's get to the data that's feeding it. There's two different types of data you can think about that can feed these large language, that can feed the agent, okay? One is structured data. My best example is, think of structured data like an Excel sheet. You've got rows, you've got columns, you've got data. It needs to be structured in some sort of format to make value of it. And that structured data is what's in your systems, and you need a data layer over those systems to be able to really get some analytics out of it. But that whole data engineering and the data science piece of the world is what we typically are familiar with. Now, what has been locked away in a cabinet that nobody's been able to really touch, it's all the unstructured data. Now, I've seen organizations try and fail when they're like, okay, well, we're going to take this very complex PDF and we're going to move it to become structured data. And we need certain patterns and we need computer vision to figure it out, and it fails. It was very early years ago where these patterns, and when the expectation of anything in the real world, like let's say financial documents or even some claims data, right? We don't have a perfect world for unstructured data. That's why it's been so hard to be able to query it and take advantage of it. Now, no longer, right? Because these large language models can actually read, they can synthesize, they can understand what's going on, even with a lot of context switching. Even when you look at an image, it knows that, hey, what was it? It was like a cookie with the dog's face on it. That's not a dog. That is a cookie with an imprint of a dog's face on it, right? Like, it's able to kind of layer that reasoning. And same thing with your unstructured data. It's probably living in a network drive, tucked away somewhere, or on a SharePoint. And how many of you have had to search SharePoint and find something? It's like pulling teeth. You're going to call a meeting. You're like, where the heck is this document? You're going to waste everybody's time. Well, think if we could actually search the content of those documents, not have to spend all this time, like, the title and the taggings and the documents. Anyway, I'm getting too far on my soapbox. Anything you want to add to structured and unstructured data, Gavin?
Nothing kind of across what they are definitionally, but I do think, understanding that one of the things that we're really working on and a lot of our customers are asking about is, how do I ask questions across both of these things? How do I say, hey, here's a new regulatory framework that's coming in place in 2024. How often were we compliant with that in 2023, right? And being able to start asking questions like that, really, really difficult, deep and analytical work that typically takes a lot of time and resources to get answers to. With generative AI, it can be a lot quicker.
Yes. And just from our experience, what we've seen and what we recommend is starting with one or the other, right? And again, starting with one or the other and being able to have an end-to-end use case delivered. And then from there, you can build upon trying to bring these things together. But again, don't boil the whole ocean. Focus on one type of data source and data type and need, solve that, do another one in parallel, and then start bridging the gap.
How can we share knowledge in abundance within organizations so that Nicole Kaufman's files aren't only for the people Nicole Kaufman wants to share them with, but that all of my intellectual capital that's shared in this unstructured way makes its way into the greater good of the organization. And so I think from a leadership standpoint, when you look at the value that this brings over time, it's really great.
Love that. And before I get into this slide, how about we keep going, Nicole? And I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
What were the expectations for generative AI? And if any of these myths were the worries that you were, when we early on in our conversations, or maybe early on when ChatGPT was released, anything that was like very much resonates with you?
Well, it's the first one on your list for a reason, because in the world today, everyone's looking for a quick fix. We're looking for quick ways to get things done. And so the first response is, oh, we've been wanting to get this fix and this fix. We can plug it in and they'll all play together. But actually, if you have data integrity issues and you've built workarounds because of things that actually might need to be looked at on a greater scale, it's not going to work to the best of its ability. And so while that appears a bit scary, like I'm going to expose, areas of concern within the data that I have today, it's important to have a growth mindset. It's one of the reasons why transformation in healthcare is something that Genesis is looking at bringing to the forefront of everything that we do. It's because we have to grow and look at the things we can do better based on the successes that we've had in the past. So that's number one. And then the other, which is big, we had to learn that it's all about the prompts if you want to be accurate. So AI is always accurate. That myth gets debunked real quick when you just ask a question 2 different times, right? And you get a little bit of a different answer. That's why the organizational buy-in to structure, implementation, rollout design is critical, so that you are able to ensure people are using the software in order to get the best result possible.
Gavin, did you want to ask any follow-ups on that?
No, I mean, I think she covered a lot of, what I was going to ask about. But I mean, I think one of the things to your last point that I've been seeing a lot of organizations think about, especially in terms of adoption, is kind of these like concentric circles, right? Like, when we're going to first roll this out, we're going to roll it out to some of our shrewdest, most knowledgeable data consumers, because when they get an answer that doesn't quite seem right, they're going to recognize that, right? If I am asking about, hey, what was my consultant's utilization? I can kind of know what seems realistic, and I can throw something out and go, okay, I asked that question wrong. And then kind of once you do that fine tuning from there, then you can roll it out to that next group, right? And it's kind of those concentric circles of, solve it at this level, then solve it here, then solve it here, that I'm seeing be really successful.
I think the last point to that is all organizations are different. They look at data outcomes, success differently. And so what the feedback loop provides is it really begins to understand what's important to your company and what's important to your department based on the way that you're chatting with the data. So it's great, especially for new leaders who are wanting to get up and running very quickly, for people that have looked at the same data in the same way for the last 15 years. There's just so much opportunity in the way that it can be applicable across organizations.
Yep. And rather than reading this slide, I'm just going to say it takes hard work. It takes effort, right? And I'm just going to say it again. It's not a sentient thing. This is not something that's going to take over your systems, but it is something to be very mindful of how you roll it out, right? And how to be able to set expectations. I believe expectation setting is very important as your organization gets a hold of generative AI, starts using it for certain use cases. Don't promise the world, right? But understand where the business value is and why you're doing this effort and why it's going to be a big difference maker for your organization in the long run. It is important, both privacy and security in this whole context of generative AI and the whole context of data in general. But just like the same ways that we are able to control and whether it's the access or the data within that access for generative AI, you have to think privacy and security first. ChatGPT has components of this. Some of these commercial pieces do as well. But when you think of like what happened with Samsung, they had a lot of their team members going there and putting a lot of sensitive information, non-public information into a commercial offering. That's not what it's for, right? And so what we're seeing is this need of having a private copilot within the infrastructure, within the four walls of an organization, especially in the healthcare industry. And that's really what allows people to bring more trust and trustworthiness to what they're going to ask that generative AI copilot to do. You're able to also provide context, or you're able to provide security based on who I am, what my role is. I mean, the way it works in the back end, let's say on a structured use case, just like how you create what's called role level security in a report, it's going to be able to take on that same way of, hey, well, I'm querying this data. Does this person have access? And, I'm going to provide that context of, if I'm like a regional director or somewhere in the state, I'm not going to give it the whole nation's data. I'm going to give it just what it cares about for that individual. Okay, we're going to keep going. All right, now let's get to the use case. And I think this is the fun part of the discussion. Well, how am I going to use this, and how can I make it valuable today? To give you all ideas, especially for those, since they're on the call and wanting to get, roll their hands up and do something with generative AI. Hopefully this gives you a good idea of what you can do at your organization. Now, first one we have is financial planning and analysis. What is the challenge? Wide array of finance KPIs. We have to do acrobatics because one department or one individual wants to see their financial data one way or another. And this is just inherent in finance, folks. If you've ever been on a meeting with a finance team, it's going to be hundreds of questions and permutations on how they want that data to be looked at, and which causes a lot of work on the data team, whether it's the analysts or the engineers. One different perspective on the P&L or these different ledger entries or whatever it is, or the forecast, creates a lot of work. And sometimes you don't realize how much work is really under those covers. So how can we bring generative AI, and how can we use a large language model to do this? Think of the solution where you have the large language model is able to query and build and do those acrobatics almost like an analyst does on the fly. Because in the end, it's really just writing SQL. And as long as you have that data that it's working off of, great. And the impact, what does it do? It allows the data team to actually focus on what they should be doing, which is building more extensible models, keeping the data clean, governing it, versus having to do many different permutations just on what the business needs today, because it's going to change tomorrow, right? Nicole, do you want to add anything to this FP&A type example?
I'll just say that we've all been in Excel hell. And when the person who knows how to work the pivot table is off on vacation and you're having to get something quick for someone, that it takes a lot out of people to try to get different types of data into the hands of the folks that are asking for it. And so it's important to reduce redundancy, increase efficiency, and just have better work-life balance for the people who are asked to produce reports at any given time. At Genesis, we've got a lot of data. We've got a lot of interest in looking at data differently. What we don't always have is the same source. And so what we are most excited about is our source of truth through generative AI will become much more consistent across the board. And we can feed it the things that we want it to use as the source as we find ways to be more efficient with our data.
Yeah, and I think that impact is right on the money, where it's just save time, save money, and get quicker time to insight for things that have taken us that takes a whole team to be able to cater to the needs of what those decision makers are trying to do in the finance space.
When I think there's even like this human element to that too, where when you're the analyst who's asked to go create the SQL view for the ad hoc question for the executive on Monday, and you can't get to it till Wednesday, and then you do it, and then by Wednesday they go, actually, we kind of moved on from this. Thank you, though. How frustrating is that, right? And so I think it's kind of both of those things. It's reducing that friction really for everyone.
Certainly.
Absolutely. Okay, next one, operational efficiency and productivity. I think this is what we're really excited about, because we see so much administrative work in the healthcare setting, right? We see so much overtime, so much burnout, so many, hey, we got to respond to this thing right now. What do I do? And so how do we have a Copilot help reduce that, initial freak out moment, right? And how do we help give time back so we're actually focusing on care? We are here for our patients to provide care, not to sit there and, type into a computer while we're trying to really care for the human being, right? And I know we've been talking about this for many years, and I'm hoping generative AI really starts moving us away from using like an EMR as a cash register and actually use it as like an enabling technology of, oh, now I know who you are and how I can help you. I don't need to sit there with the screen at all. Generative AI can hear and understand the context of what the care I'm providing. It can do my notes for me and give time back administratively so the nurses can actually talk about my care, not talk about how we input something wrong into the system, right? And so having better management, what I hope it means in the end for me as a patient is it's reducing my cost of care, right? Hopefully we get to the point where somebody's not going homeless because they went and had an ER visit, right? We have so much wasted money and time in healthcare, and we really got to use technology to bring us back to earth. Nicole, I'm sure you could write a dissertation on this.
I could. And, it gets to the point of it all. We tend to start, how can the enterprise managers do their work better, quicker, faster? But honestly, it's for the people who are closest to the patient that ultimately this is really going to impact. And so if that doesn't get us excited after the last 4 years and 3 years and the burnout and stress that we've had because of COVID, then I don't know what will. So that'll be my soapbox for the day. You had one earlier, but this is mine.
Love it. Okay, and in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to the next use case. And this is one of the most, when I was talking about the unstructured data kind of being tucked away and has been really hard to take advantage of and create value from, policies and procedures, right? How many of us have had to be on those meetings where state or the feds have put out some policy, and then you need to have like multiple continuing education sessions to even understand what the heck they said? Or, hey, I'm in a meeting and or something happens at our community or facility. What is my policy? I didn't memorize it as much as HR wishes I did. And I don't know where that document is. Is there an easy way for me to ask a question, query, what should I be doing? Okay. We did have a customer that had literally 100,000 documents that they needed to have that was all gobbledygook in the name of the document. So they actually were spending manual time going through opening these documents, tagging them, renaming them, when our large language model saved them all that manual time, was actually able to understand that content of those documents. Same thing with your policies and procedures. And think about having longitudinal history of, hey, 1 year we had this policy, it evolved to this and to that. Now we've got feds or the state telling us to do one thing. Hey, help me find the gaps. Help me rewrite our policy based on what feds or the state want me to do. And typically that effort in itself, there's a whole business unit married to just writing policy and understanding policy. Hopefully we actually get them helping implement policy and getting people to know it versus just writing the policies on the policies and just wasting, we're wasting their time, right? So that impact is, hopefully we bring down the risks that we have in healthcare around just operating the machine and the operations of what's going on here, and actually get people and those closer to the front lines to feel good about, hey, I've got this Copilot that can help me do the right thing at the right time.
I think that you kind of covered it here. I mean, this customer was a really interesting use case where it was something where they said, hey, for these 100,000 documents, we're going to have to hire up a team of 3 people to go rename them. And we're getting it. They were employment documents that state regulators were coming in and saying, hey, can you supply Gavin McLaughlin's driving record? Can you supply Gavin McLaughlin's W-2 for last year? And their choice was either, hey, we're going to take this fine, or we're going to actually have to go send people to go find a literal needle in the haystack. And so, you know, being able to do this in a matter of a couple weeks was a huge win for them. And it was just kind of, I think, one of those great use cases where the value statement was so clear. And it's the kind of thing that really builds wins in an organization, kind of builds that buy-in that you need to really get adoption.
Well, Gavin, and I know we've only got 6 minutes left,
Yeah.
but this cues up leadership opportunity for people to find ways to lead better. And so we have administrators who might have to have a crucial conversation, and they might want some tips, quick and easy, on whatever device we've provided that allows them to say, give me 3 ways to handle this based on my HR policy. And it allows for them to be fueled with the tools that they need. So I'm just excited about how it's not only going to help us with the data side of the business, but also the people side of the business.
100%.
I love using the term knowledge management. You know, it's helping us have that knowledge management for the people to be the best they can be within the organization. Okay, let's keep moving. So how do we build this AI strategy, and what is an AI strategy? Okay, so be pragmatic, you know, set this North Star. And, you know, Gavin, I would love for you to maybe touch on this if you like.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think often people get stuck in this space where AI strategy can feel kind of overwhelming, right? Like it's a brand new space. It kind of feels like the Wild West. I mean, it kind of is. OpenAI had what, 4 CEOs in the last month?
The
Right?
last
Like,
week?
yeah, I mean, things are changing rapidly. And so I think it can kind of be hard to like find your footing. But, you know, what you can do is ground that in what do we actually know we want from AI? You know, one of the things that I've kind of really seen in our conversations with customers and people who are just interested is they want to leverage their own AI, their own data for AI, right? So that's kind of a consistent theme. And I think you can kind of set a North Star around something like that. How do we leverage our data well? But, you know, really kind of you have to kind of think about that internally and set kind of a North Star for yourselves. But also realize it won't take that much to start. You don't have to be able to realize that tomorrow. The North Star is about where you're going, not where you are today. And then once you have that North Star, you want to start getting those foundational pieces in place. Do we have data unified, right? And again, let's start with those specific use cases that allow us to get that success. And then it's, yeah, charting that path. So deliver value quickly and consistently. This is just like a good rule of thumb for leaders, for people who are trying to kind of build something from the grassroots. If you want buy-in from your organization, identify use cases that are going to deliver value along the way. Because if you do this thing where it's like, hey, we've got to build a data warehouse, we've got to roll this out to absolutely everyone in the organization, and only 2 years down the line are we going to realize value, you've set the bar too high and you're going to lose buy-in along the way. And then it's really kind of understanding for your own selves, like, are we an organization where, hey, we can build this all ourselves? Are we an organization that needs to leverage partners for platform or partner expertise for different things? Having some clarity around that, I think, is really, really important. And I mean, Nicole, I'd ask you kind of, how did you guys think about this when you were starting to take this on?
Well, we definitely fall in the camp of feeling like we could build it ourselves. I'll just say that, you know, we've got a lot of muscle, and it took us a minute to be open to the fact that we can be better if we bring in an expert in this space and bring in folks that actually can help shepherd us through how to use the information that we have available. And then we had the selection process of who are those super users that we want to help drive the strategy for the organization, and how do we layer the deployment to where by the time it gets to that CNA to the administrator, to the cook, to the maintenance director, that we flushed out anything that's going to make it more difficult for them to do their job and adopt. So while there needs to be a path that includes some different phases, you definitely want to ensure you've thought through the who and the when you get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you build it, they will come mantra is not what you should be taking with data ever. You want to be able to build around a specific use case, just as Gavin said, right? You want to set expectations and you want to roll it out to a small group. You want to get it in their hands. You want them using it. And what's really nice about generative AI is you can actually see what people are asking. In a report, when you're clicking around, there's not a lot of telemetry there, right? With generative AI, you're getting direct feedback from your end users, right? For those that have lived in the data world and had to get into requirements meetings where it's like, hey, you tell me what you want. You tell me what you want. It's like, no, you tell me what you want. We just get in this endless circle. Pulled my hair out before. And fortunately, here in the generative AI space, we can see what people actually want. Collect that feedback. Iterate. Expand on your wins, right? And love this Drake meme that we've got here. Thank you, Drew, for that. But make sure you're doing it end to end and you have an end in sight. So key takeaways, and then I believe we can get to Q&A. AI is all about productivity, not replacing us. Embrace it. It's here, and let's be better in our day-to-day lives with generative AI. Industry AI requires a data-ready infrastructure, and I will again mention what Gavin said. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have the best data warehouse to start taking advantage of generative AI. Just get your data to a place that it can be used. And you need an infrastructure, whether it's Skypoint or you're going to build it yourself, that can get you to that point of being able to have enabling data. This is your chance to leapfrog where you've been. If you're in organizations that's still on Excel, and I have to say, majority of organizations are still working, whether it's in Excel workbooks or the AS400s or Access databases. Okay, we get it. You didn't invest in the data warehouse or the big data world or in the traditional AI. Now is your time to get to the point of generative AI. And generative AI has allowed us to actually bring technology costs down. If you are in a very price-sensitive industry like healthcare or skilled nursing, this is the time where the investment, your dollar goes so much further. So don't get left behind. The more you ask of your data, the more AI ready your data should be, and the more AI ready it will be. Your AI ready infrastructure, you're not solving just for generative AI, you're solving for many other needs. That same infrastructure can be used for reporting. It can be used for automation. It can be used for generative AI. Think of this as a more extensible data layer that you are enabling for your organization that is allowing you, let's see what happens after generative AI. But whatever that next thing is, you will be ready because you've ate your vegetables and you've built up that foundation that you need. And finally, stay ahead with pragmatic use cases. Don't boil the whole ocean. Set realistic expectations to what generative AI is and what it's going to solve. Now we're in really the dial-up stage of the world with generative AI and at the organization. Let's make sure that we're keeping expectations in check. Right. With that, we're finally at Q&A. 4 minutes over. Thank you all for have been able to stay on a little extra with us. If you've got questions, let's address them.
I've got one question from earlier that we may have missed when we were on the security slide, but it's a question for Nicole about why not just buy generic ChatGPT? What are some of the drawbacks and limitations there?
Well, one is very clear for us is Skypoint is an industry expert, and they can, and Greg has shepherded us through all of the questions, all of the concerns, all of the potential planning stages. And it helps when you have someone who can almost anticipate, based on the research that they've done in the organization and the expertise they have in the industry, what you need to think about. We value consultants, we value partners. And so with ChatGPT, we would spend money hiring people and getting folks in there trying to create our use cases and figuring out for us. Skypoint gets us right to where we need to be through the partnership that we expect to have within the organization.
Well, I'm sure, a lot of people, if they don't have tons of questions, it is because this is so new, right? Hopefully you don't feel like you've been fire hosed with information and a lot of this has been over the head. I know hopefully it's going to take time to digest and really get your arms around a lot of these concepts and ideas. And I think a lot of it comes into clarity as you use it and as you try and bring these projects to the business and into production, which I think the conversations like this are going to evolve very quickly. I think what we're going to see on the headlines is going to be more about what's been enabled versus, why we shouldn't even go there. So I think that's exciting. And I think next time we have this webinar, whether it's in a month or a couple months, I'm excited to see the type of questions we're going to get or the type of perspectives we're going to get, even in just that short time frame.
And I think that's a good idea because by then we will probably have some efficiencies to share as an organization on ways that this collaboration has unlocked us in new ways in 2024.
Yes. You already know what we're going to ask you next, Nicole. When are you available?
Hey, listen, I want to I don't want to be in Portland, but hopefully we can all be together at one of the upcoming conferences. Look out for that. And I'm just excited to continue this journey with the folks on the line. Find me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, if that's a better spot. Greg is so responsive. Please make sure you reach out to him as well. There's a lot of questions here. I felt a little silly with some of my initial questions. And Greg said, no, you're not silly. Like, this is what people are trying to get an understanding of, because then you figure out how to really apply it to your organization.
The more we know, the more effective we can be.
There is one more last minute question, if we can squeeze that in, and we can keep it short. But the question is, how long from A to Z would the process take for us to see our data?
If you choose a use case where it's unstructured data, that's going to be a lot quicker and a lot faster path to value, typically speaking. LLMs are really, really good at reading documents and unstructured data. If you have a structured data use case, it might take a little bit longer to see good responses, right? Like, it doesn't take that long to train an LLM. It's just to train it to the kinds of responses you want, it might take a bit longer. So, it could be anywhere from, 2 to 8 weeks. It could be longer, just depending on the complexity of your use case.
I think it was more about access to our data that took the longest, right? Making sure everything that you needed. And that was still, when you have everyone on board, 2 to 3 weeks. Within 30 days, Greg, I was able to ask strategic questions about census growth trends. Where am I seeing declines? Because we have that in a lot of places already. And so it allowed for me to act quicker within 30 days of our initial launch.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning, if you've already got data infrastructure, you don't need to go recreate the wheel. Your team at Genesis, your data team is so amazing. They've built up so many great enabling capabilities that if you think about generative AI, just becomes that next layer on the cake, and that can leverage what you've done. Just need a little bit more additions, as I was saying, kind of that metadating, that tagging, the fine tuning and the training. But that for the structured use cases, if you've already got a warehouse, marts, or you've already spent investment in dollars on putting that up, generative AI is just going to take that one step further, and it'll shorten that path to value.
With that, thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of Skypoint, we're really appreciative of your time. Went into a little overtime, but those are the golden minutes. We got a lot of good questions and answers there. Nicole, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. Greg, Gavin, insightful as always.
Appreciate everybody being here and wanting to cut through what is true and what is not true with generative AI and really embrace it. That's what we're all here to do. And again, I feel like those that have been in attendance today are the ones that want to be the innovators and the leaders. And so thank you for having that confidence.